What's up YouTube? It's AjilityPoints. Welcome back. I'm going to be showing you the ultimate ranger build from early game, mid game, late game, and then end game. Now there will be chapters for any of you that want to scroll through if you're looking for something specific, but be mindful that I tend to sprinkle in tips when I'm explaining stuff that can help you throughout any stage of the game. So, for example, I know one of the toughest things for new players is managing your inventory when you're out and about. Well, one thing that could save you tons of space is knowing that you could be deleting every item that says valuable in the description, since that means they're only meant for selling, and I have a full video on how you can make insane amounts of money super easy, so you'll never have to worry about clogging up your backpack space with junk. That video will be down in the description below, and for all these ultimate video guides, I'll also be putting a link to my XP farms for anyone that's trying to get those precious skill points a little farther, or maybe wants to try a different class, or just achievement hunting. So let's get started with the early game. For armor, I got these chests lined up. For armor, one of the best sets early and even late game once you can start upgrading gear will be the ranger set. You can find this set super early from the slime boss, or just breaking large and regular wooden crates around like the early area of the starting biome essentially. If you're having trouble finding it, once you defeat Gorm the Devourer, you'll have access to the Cloaked Merchant. And I was about to say he's the one that's snickering over there, but that's another NPC. He's snickering a lot, isn't he? Who's that? That's this dude. Yeah. He's gonna be doing it a lot. So anyway, yeah, once you defeat Gorm the Devourer, you'll have access to one of the merchants that sells you the boss summoning items. I believe it's you. Yeah, he sells ways to resummon the slime, Gorm, and the Hive Mother. So for weapons, the basic wooden bow will be your obvious starting weapon, but there's a few really good ones you'll have access to. The slingshot would be the next best. Its damage might seem low, but it fires super fast, and you can find this weapon in the world, but your best bet might be to craft it at the tin anvil. The next best thing after that would be the flintlock musket. This thing shoots horribly slow. I currently don't have one. I do, but here, one second. There we go, like magic. Yeah, so the next best thing after the slingshot would be the flintlock musket. This thing shoots horribly slow, but its damage more than makes up for it. And if you include the fact that you will have piercing with the ranger set, this weapon can take out 2 enemies in a single shot. You can find this musket from locked copper chests, which are chests that will randomly spawn from a wall that you mined. And they can be dropped from cavelings in the stone biome. The drop chance is fairly low, but if you manage to get it, this weapon can handle the first 3 bosses pretty well. Then, although it's not ranged physical damage, there is a magic ranged weapon you can find from those shaman enemies in the stone biomes. It's also a low chance to drop, but it's easily one of my favorite early game weapons, as it does a ton of damage and applies burn too. The main thing to take note of is that it will use your mana, and early on that there's not a whole lot you can do about that. So a really good strategy is to fire the staff till you're out of mana, then just swap to another weapon while it regenerates. Now for necklaces and rings. Early on, these hardly make a difference, so for the most part, just treat it like something is better than nothing. You know, you might come across like a wooden ring, you get some extra HP, you might get lucky with the copper cross necklace. I don't know why these are there, that shouldn't be there. As for pets, the bird is incredibly good to farm, like as many eggs as you can, since it can also be your endgame pet eventually. But gaining XP for this pet is pretty difficult early on, since 1.0. Most pets will earn XP through attacking enemies and stuff like that, but whereas the bird doesn't really attack, it just buffs you. It's pretty difficult to level it up. You need a bunch of candy and stuff like that. But yeah, other pets that kind of help fight with you is actually pretty helpful early on, so I'd say pick whichever you like. And lastly, we have our offhand item, That would be the shield. Shields that you can craft are great for two reasons. They give you free defensive stats just by having it equipped, and although I rarely do it myself, they can block attacks and even parry with proper timing, leaving monsters stunned in place for a second. But once you're able to beat Malagaz, it will be worth farming him as he drops easily the best offhand item in the entire game, the Rift Lens, which we're getting ahead. Oh gosh. The Rift Lens. This thing lets you teleport a short distance with a small cooldown, which helps you dodge attacks and even cross small gaps in the map with ease. I ended up using mine pretty much all the way to endgame. As you saw, I grabbed it from that chest over on the right. I only really took it off whenever I wanted to kill a boss slightly faster, and I was confident in their attack patterns and whatnot. But incredible item. You would think that they would have saved this item for way later. Maybe they were planning to, and they decided not to. So now we can move on to mid game. Take that back. Mid game is basically after you beat the first 3 bosses and have opened up the wall to gain access to further distances from the center, new biomes and such. This is where necklaces and rings can start to make a huge difference, so it's a good idea to start investing in one type of main weapon class, either melee or range, but you know, in this circumstance we're investing in range, right? It's pretty difficult to invest in magic and summoning as a main class early on because of the lack of reliable mana equipment, so it's best to keep those as secondaries. In my experience, I found range to be the most useful with magic as my backup weapon. Getting ranged XP was super important, so I just kind of went for like the like I mentioned earlier, the magic staff. Just throw that out, wait for the mana while you fire with your main weapon. So let's talk about armor. Like I mentioned earlier, the ranger set, pretty fantastic for a while, and it can even be taken into late game. You'll feel incredibly squishy with the new enemies right after you unlock the wall, but once you're able to make an upgrade bench, you can start upgrading this, and that makes a huge difference. By upgrading the ranger set, you can get its stats to rival or even exceed a lot of the other gear at this point of the game, so you won't have to worry about lacking defense, and you get to keep the set bonus for piercing, which brings me to my next point. Piercing by itself is really powerful, but there's a weapon you can get at this point of the game that makes it absolutely busted. So let's talk about weapons. The bows you can make from the new anvils will easily beat any pre-wall weapons. The next best thing is what makes piercing absolutely busted. Besides the bows you can start to make, right? That's a solarite bow. What's that doing in there? Look, I'm all over the place. The point is, any of the bows you can make from the anvils, pre or post wall, are going to be better than the pre-wall weapons, right? So you can just make those, go for those when you gain access to them. The next best thing is what makes piercing absolutely busted, but I would only recommend trying to get this weapon early if you're up for a challenge. Otherwise, disregard this part. Disregard it completely. Beyond the wall and even further into the new biomes are crystal biomes. They're scattered around the world. The crystal walls themselves are unlikely to be mined early on, but you can eventually mine them later. So there's that. The weapon we're looking for technically exists in those crystal biomes, but the enemy that drops it will sometimes go out of the tough crystal walls and try to attack you. These are the Nilipedes, giant, terrifying worms that have killed me dozens of times. They have a fair amount of HP and they deal a ton of damage. The trick here is that anytime they're outside of the crystal walls, because sometimes they'll just, they basically burrow through walls. They don't care if there's walls in the way. They just go wherever they want. But for the most part, they stay in those crystal biomes, but sometimes they seep out of it. And if you're close enough, they're trying to run out and hit you, and then they'll gradually like go back to where their like original spawning location is. Yeah, so the trick here is that when they're outside of the crystal walls, you want to defeat them then, so that the weapon that they can drop is now outside the crystal and right there for you to pick up. Careful using stuff like burn damage, as you don't want them to die when they're burrowing inside the crystal. You know, taking like, you might get them super low, they're on fire, they go back in the crystal and they die in there. Yeah, these monsters do not respawn, so you want to be like extra careful about that. So yeah, you'll probably be jumping around different crystal biomes, kind of like getting as close to the edges of them as possible to see if you can antagonize one of the worms to come and try and hit you. And then anytime they're close enough, just start smacking them. If you manage to pull this off, you're rewarded with the Ricochet Shuriken. It's a base level 16 weapon. We'll just take that from there. Its base level is 16. And it shoots super fast, has an incredible secondary shot. And as the name implies, the shuriken will basically fly back and forth after being thrown. I can show you real quick. So yeah, anytime you throw it, you can see it bounces back and forth, which is pretty insane for a specific reason. So normally, once the shuriken hits an enemy a single time, even though it's doing this back and forth thing, once it hits an enemy, it goes away. But with piercing, you're essentially getting 2 hits. That's literally 2xing your damage output. The secondary shot has built-in piercing, and it doesn't have a limit to how much it pierces. It does take a second to charge up, but even without a piercing set, this will just continuously do that. So as long as you put up with the charge time, which isn't very effective for just clearing mobs normally. But yeah, the main thing to take away here is that with piercing, each of your shots are basically hitting twice. You're 2xing your damage, and it's still worth using the secondary shot, even though it has that charge time. But those times where it's worth it are a bit more situational, and we're gonna talk more about it later. Okay, so now the rings and the necklaces. Let's go back here. For rings and necklaces, for your rings, you can craft 2 golden rings. These are polished, and now I'm realizing why these are in the wrong one, because I wanted to go over the difference between polished and non-polished. So you can grab these 2 golden rings from the jewelry workbench that you'll eventually have access to pretty early. They give you physical range damage, and the polished versions will give you less physical range damage, but it adds range attack speed, which is much more important. Attack speed is very important to this build. But early on, it's not as important, but I'd still say this is probably better. But the caveat is that you would need a ton of crafting XP. And so if you're not doing my method for farming crafting XP, then you probably, I mean, these still do a lot, and you are getting the additional damage, right? Like this one's only a level 11, this one's 15, and the total damage is technically lower, right? But you're getting that range attack speed. So these are totally fine if you're not going for the XP farm. They still give you a ton of attack. For your necklace, a pretty powerful one would be the mold vein necklace. I don't have it. I probably have it in a different world, but either way, I think I have the stats written down. Show. Where is it? Oh, a pretty powerful one. The mold vein necklace gives you a ton of range damage. I don't have the actual stat. I lied. It can be found in the mold biomes, but trust me when I say it's a lot. So it's kind of worth it. But the mold biomes is where it drops, and those are within the jungle. Its drop rate is pretty low, so I wouldn't bank too much on them. So the alternative would be going for the copper cross necklace, which if you haven't just found naturally, you can easily craft these at the same jewelry workbench, and upgrading it will net you a ton of crit chance, which means more damage. I would also recommend sticking with the non-polished version of the copper cross necklace, since it gives you more crit chance. The polished one gives you less crit chance, but it gives you critical hit damage, but not enough to really justify it. And especially since early on, you're not really getting crit chance from a lot of resources. Your range skill might not be like that high, or if it is, you're not attacking fast enough to really proc. If you don't know what I'm talking about, weakness detection, 10% chance on range hit to increase critical hit chance by 100% for a short duration. And that you can just like reproc that and reproc that by attacking very quickly. You're essentially 100% of the time at 100% critical hit chance. So you might not have that luxury entirely, or it might not feel as reliable since you're not attacking like super fast yet. But I would still just recommend the base copper cross necklace. Upgrade it as much as you can, and so you get that extra crit chance. The reason I have the ivy ring and the mold ring in here is sort of the same reason. If you really want crit chance to start proccing for mana regen purposes and stuff like that, or you want your range attack speed to start to like scale up, the ivy ring and the mold ring are alternatives, but for the most part I would just stick with the gold crystal ring personally. All right, yeah, we're getting into late game now, and for this specific ultimate guide, this gear pretty much goes into end game as well. So this is the late game portion, but this gear will be basically pushing into end game as well with like a few tweaks. Only difference will be the level of the gear after upgrading it and taking advantage of your skill points. But for the most part, for armor, we have the Grim set. Once again, we can totally stick with the Ranger set. It's totally fine taking it into late game. It handles most monsters super well and can even shred bosses with the shuriken piercing combo. So some bosses, if you can get the shuriken to go all the way through them and it comes back, it will hit them twice. But for like the really big monsters or at like the wrong angle, even with piercing, and I think they changed this for 1.0, but even with piercing, the shuriken won't go all the way through, even though you have the ranger set, so that it's not hitting them twice. It's a little frustrating how it works, but I'm sure they changed it because that was just absolutely busted. I was literally hitting the bosses for like 2x damage for free. But now they changed it, so you can still kind of pull it off, but you need the right angle, and it's whatever. So yeah, I mean, you can totally stick with the ranger set, handles most monsters and all that. But what if I told you, and I know you're probably already kind of looking at this and you're like, that I don't see range damage on that, what's going on? What if I told you this build can get even more insane with a little help from minions? If you want to do a full ranger build and not mess with minions at all, just a 0 minion rule going in, I totally understand. But since this is an ultimate build guide, we're going to be making the ranger even stronger, and we're going to use all the resources and all the subclasses necessary to do that. And I'm sure even you've noticed it with some of these things, like in the melee skill tree, there's 4% chance on melee hit to increase range damage. So, you know, and then vice versa here too. 20% chance on ranged hit to increase melee damage by 30%. Also, don't consider this into the build yet. We'll go over that in a second. But yeah. So with that out of the way, the reason that we're going with the Grim set is because of the importance of minions and how it starts to play a role into our damage output. Thankfully, in order for this to work, you don't need a whole lot of skill points put into summoning, so you can get this off the floor in a pretty short amount of time. But I'll obviously be talking about going even further past that so that we can really maximize our damage output. What I'm referring to is the so I mean, you're going range, so a lot of your skill points are going to be going into range. You're probably not summoning all that often, so your summoning talent tree isn't going to be like really all that much fleshed out. But the idea is to gradually start to pour into summoning, which again, I'll refer to my XP farm video It's going to be in the description to both of those videos for the farming and stuff. But thankfully, you don't need a whole lot for this to really like get off the ground, and that's kind of what I was referring to. Obviously, you need the first 5 points going into here, and then the next 5 points are essentially going into here. Even like 3 or 4 points into this is like pretty darn good, but getting the full 5 is what makes this shine. And I mean, look at that. 10% range attack speed per active minion. At all the rings that we could look at right now, stand no chance when it comes to something as simple as putting a skill point into this, right? And because of that, that also means that we're going to have more room for other rings, right? We can add different rings that do other effects. And the irony there is that the rings I chose for this build are minion count, but for obvious reasons. Okay, so we're still basically talking about the Grim set, and you can see its stats. I mean, there's magic damage, which sounds irrelevant, but don't let that discourage you. Like, oh, I'd rather have something else there. The fact of the matter is that you get +2 max minion count from this, and you're also getting minion damage, which early on in the late game, it's not that important. Anything related to minion damage, and just to reiterate the whole, you don't need a whole lot of points in your summoning early on, but eventually even those minions are going to contribute like tons of damage, so much damage. And look at this, you also get like 75 magic barrier per active minion. This set lets you, or this build lets you summon up to 7 minions. So you're getting 75 times 7. That's a lot of shield and a lot of attack speed. So, I mean, I don't know if I really, if I'm reiterating the point too much, but that's essentially what we're trying to go for. This set can be found from small and large charred crates, and that's in the lava biome, which is within the desert. But yeah, you can get that from the lava biome inside of the desert. It's a 1% drop chance from lava slimes, which the lava biome is chock full of lava slimes, so you'll get it pretty quickly. It also drops from igneous, the molten mass, the lava slime boss, but that's at a 5% drop rate, which is probably the least effective way to farm it. So just stick to the lava slimes. Yeah, so like I said, having up to 7, you're going to be summoning seven minions at max, and that's going to, I mean, you get 5 from this, and then you're getting 2 more from here. That's going to send your attack speed through the roof. For our weapons, we still want to use the ricochet shuriken. Although we lost the ability to pierce with our primary shot, this weapon will now earn us infinite mana, so that we can summon the max amount of minions in a super short amount of time. And that's important since minions only last for a certain amount of time, and you don't want to only summon 2 or 3, then wait before you can summon again, because by then the original summons will be near expiring, putting you in this like annoying struggle to maintain damage and minions, because you're like flopping between summoning and then back to your weapon, and then summoning and back to your weapon. It's not impossible, but it's very ineffective to just kind of summon as many as you can, which is only like 2, and then you'd have to wait a half second to get the third one, because the mana cost at base level, this says item level 2. Oh, that's base level. The mana cost is at 36. But with this set, your mana is going to go up a little bit. You can use the base level tome. Like I said, you're getting the most out of your minions later when you're investing a little bit more. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, sorry. But yeah, the point is basically you're using the ricochet shuriken. It's no longer piercing, but we're going to be gaining a ton of mana, and that lets us summon the max amount of our minions, which is important since minions only last for a short amount of time. You don't want to get into that struggle like I mentioned. And the way that our shuriken will generate us infinite mana, I'm sure You might be wondering how does the shuriken give you mana? It doesn't do that. That's not in the description. It's from using the secondary attack and also having a point put into the magic tree. So again, it's like you want to do all range, I understand, but this is still doable, still viable, and you don't have to, you can even see it. It looks like I've been going crazy with a lot of my stats, but even for magic, you don't even need that much. Obviously, again, the first 5 points into this, which in my opinion is great. That's 5% critical hit chance. That's free. That doesn't specifically mean using a magic weapon. You're just getting 5% crit chance. Awesome. Putting 1 point into mana channeling is practically enough, especially early late game. That's practically enough. Having more will obviously be better, but I just want to reiterate that we are doing the range build, and I don't want people to like have to go through the struggle of leveling all this stuff up in order to really maximize their potential. So the trick is to have at least enough points into the mana on crits right here, and having even 1 point is enough, but the more the smoother. Having this maxed, however, will lead more towards what your end game build will be like, since upgrading summoning books is going to cost you more mana, and we can eventually have it so our minions are contributing a lot of damage on their own, and to add on top of that what we're putting out. So the ultimate goal is to maximize our range damage, and the secondary goal is to increase our minions damage so that they're also contributing. For our rings, we'll be using the 2 puppet rings to increase our minion max count, obviously. This also adds minion attack speed, which plays a role in the end game version of the build. It should go without saying that you definitely don't need to upgrade your summoning book or these rings until you're pushing for the end game, since it costs a ton of resources to upgrade and only makes summoning just way more expensive mana wise. Like you can see at level 15, it's 75 mana to summon even one. So for now, the base version of the rings and the base version of the summoning book is more than enough. You can get these rings from the caveling mummies, which are found in the desert, and also from Ra'akar, the boss, the desert boss. You can also get it from fishing in the desert, but the mummies are your best shot. For the necklace, this is one you can either swap every now and again, depending on what you're doing, maybe because you're fighting a boss for the first time and you don't know their attacks, or whatever may be the case. But the glass bead necklace is so powerful with this build that it's practically worth the trade-off that you'll be taking more damage. Like I said, swapping is totally fine, and some other viable necklaces would be the Scarlet Chunk necklace, which I have right here. That's a polished version, but the base version is just worse, but still good, just worse. Yeah, so swapping is totally fine. These are some alternatives. You can use the polished Scarlet Chunk if you wanted to, just to give yourself some extra defense. But by not using the glass necklace, the only time your damage might feel like it's not doing a whole lot, in my experience, would be when you're fighting non-boss monsters, one after the other. Since summoning minions outside of bosses it's still viable, but does require a few extra buttons to sort of get started, and even having just 1 or 2 minions out will obviously make you much stronger, but having to summon them each time you encounter an enemy when you're out and about adventuring, it can get pretty tedious. So if you are finding that to be the case, then having that mid-game set likely already upgraded, your ranger set and stuff like that, the rings, I'm sure you've already upgraded a little bit before you got to this portion of the game. But you have it sitting in a chest, right? You've been using it, and so you get to whip that back out, maybe upgrade it a bit more to keep up, and just slap that on. And then, you know, anytime you go up against a boss, you just throw this back on. That's going to be pretty taxing resource wise to like fully upgrade everything, so just be mindful of that. For the most part, I opted to just go for this. Even when I'm just out and about, I'm totally okay with taking extra damage. I kill things before they even touch me, essentially. And we're on hard mode. Okay, now we can talk about endgame. Yay, we made it. So I don't even have to go to another chest here because, like I mentioned earlier, you'll be using your late game build with it as upgraded as you can get it. Your summoned minion damage will start playing a role, so upgrading your minions of choice and having more points into your summoning skill will be worth the effort. Obviously the minions will cost more now. If you are to upgrade the book, you don't have to, but if they're going to be costing more now. But with proper placement, your shuriken secondary attack can be thrown once or even twice and start racking up hits and proccing your 100% crit chance from the ranger tree, netting you tons of mana so you can summon constantly. If you have seen my XP farming video, the trick I use is essentially I throw the shuriken, and while the shuriken's just bouncing back and forth, I'm earning mana, so I get to summon and summon and summon and then throw the shuriken again, and like while the shuriken's just doing damage, earning me crits and earning me mana, you get to keep summoning. For your lantern, you'll want the soul lantern. That would be this thingy right here. This drops from Rakar as well, so you can farm him for that. And for your pet, you can use the bird and avoid, you can use the bird. I would avoid wasting points in your bird skill tree for crit chance. Mine is currently like that because this bird is supposed to be for a different build video, but we got other birds in here too. This one's God ? And then crit damage. So I would avoid putting points into crit chance, since you essentially have like 100% crit chance anyway, and you're attacking so fast that the proc is just constantly going off. So instead I would opt for crit damage maybe, or range damage, or even the triple trouble it's called. Even this is totally fine. It's a 2% chance, but again, we're attacking stupid fast. The more that you have in one bird skill tree, the obviously better it's going to be. Which is why I would recommend definitely hatching as many birds as possible to keep getting these rolls and see if you can get an incredible one. And that's why this one's called God ? Yeah, so for your offhand, the Rift Lens is still incredible. It's still great, and it's not just to avoid damage, but it can also help you shred the bosses even faster by just getting to their location quicker. Whenever they move during the fight, you can just teleport over there and just keep your damage going, keep your mana regen. There's also the Hydra Tooth. This is a bit closer to endgame, so it's not likely that you'll have this at that point, but I believe this is the second boss, right? Right, you'll answer that. Yeah, from Druidra. No, that's the first one. Yeah, so the first. Anyway, this thing is totally fine. It's got an insane stat on it. As you can see, that 4% chance on hit to deal triple amount of damage. Just imagine that with the bird as like, and the speed at which you're attacking, but it also contributes to physical range damage. So incredible. But I'd still definitely, I would not blame anyone for sticking with the Rift Lens. It's just so good. It's just so good. So other alternatives, if you don't want to use the Rift Lens for whatever reason, is the Pet Rock. If you're not using the bird and you're instead using an attacking pet, the Pet Rock's pretty good. Definitely don't use the Pet Rock on the bird. It increases the stats of your pet, and the bird's stats are like, they're very, very low, like 3% range attack speed. You're not going to get much out of that. So definitely Pet Rock is totally fine as a substitute. The Turtle Shell for armor damage reduction against bosses, or if you truly feel like you want a little extra crit chance because you're finding difficulty in using the Shuriken secondary attack, you can use the Concealed Blade. That offers crit chance, and you can even then go for crit chance on your bird if you really want to. But obviously that's not optimal. It's just alternatives for different playstyles. So throughout this, we mentioned the basic strategy of how to really use this build, but we'll be finishing this up with like a basic rundown all at once, like how you're going to be using the build and like the bread and butter. I almost called it bread and potatoes. So you'll be starting most fights by buffing, obviously, summoning a couple of your minions, and charging your shuriken secondary shot. I can show that off right now. We're basically going to be, and I'll explain it before I just throw it at you, because yeah. So you're gonna be buffing, summoning a couple of minions, right? You're gonna be summoning however many you can, which is 2, right off the bat, no extra help, and you're gonna be charging your shuriken secondary, right? So that it goes out. It's gonna start racking up crits for you, and that's in turn gonna start feeding you mana. And then once, like as soon as that gets thrown out, you're probably already gaining some mana back, but you're gonna be getting some more mana, and you're gonna keep summoning more and more, right? You're gonna be doing that until you get the max minion count, which in this case is 7. Once all the minions are summoned, we get to basically just turn off our brain and hold left click the whole time. And once you start to see the minion count start to drop off, like they start expiring, then you're basically just rinse and repeating. You're summoning, you're charging your secondary, throwing it, summoning, and then once it's full, all you have to do at that point is just dodge attacks, move around, start throwing your shurikens. It's earning you crits, you're summoning. Once it starts to expire, summon, and so on and so forth. It's a pretty easy rinse and repeat process. But yeah, it didn't take me too long to figure it out. I can show it off real quick. I know I'm like kind of stumbling words right now, but so we're summon. You can see our crit, or our mana just basically filling back up to max. I could just hold right click at this point, obviously because there's so many enemies there that I'm getting way more. But in the case of it just being one enemy, then it's still giving you a decent chunk. So at this point, I have all my minions, right? So I could have just been holding left click this whole time. Our shurikens are going out like as fast as possible. Not all my range tree is obviously a little scuffed at the moment, but that's essentially it. Summon, you're out of mana. You throw this, you start to get your mana back. You can even throw it first, right? And you're just summoning. Once we're back up to full, we can even throw a couple of these in between. Those still earn crit, right? But this, throwing the secondary, makes it so you can swap to your book. You're getting crits, you're getting damage, and you're just using your book the whole time, right? So lets you do 2 actions at once. I could just hold right click with my book since I'm gaining mana and just constantly summon. So yeah, I love this build because it does let you play mostly head empty if you want to, but it can also go absolutely nuts once you get the rotation down. It might seem like mental overload, but trust me, I wouldn't blame you if it does seem like it took me a little while to get used to it. But if that's truly the case for you, where it seems like it's a little too much, you can ease the mental load by sticking to a non-upgraded summoning book so that the mana cost is cheaper, and you can just swap to your shurikens, and you don't even have to use a secondary attack. You're using the cheap summons, right? Cheap summons, you get like how many do we get? We get 4 before we have to start worrying about the mana, and it doesn't even take long for it to regen. But in the circumstance that we're in a fight and we want to continue doing our damage and dodging and whatnot, once we're summoning, we're out of mana. We don't even have to use the secondary shot. We can just start throwing the primary shot, and if we so happen to get a crit, I mean, mana's been regenerating with or without crits. We're doing damage. Our minions are doing damage as well. But at that point, yeah, you're summoning. So the reason I'm saying that this is like an easier method is because all I have to do is hold left click right now, swap over to 4, hold right click, swap over to 3, hold left click, 4, right click, left, You know what I mean? It can be dumbed down is what I'm saying. But if for optimal purposes, you're getting your minions upgraded so that their damage is fairly relevant. And that's it. Final part of this video is me showing off what the build can do before you go. Leaving a like is super appreciated, and definitely subscribe if you want to see more content like this. I'm already almost finished with the Melee Ultimate Guide video, which is nuts. So look forward to that. For those of you that wish to stay for the final part of the video, I'm putting a spoiler warning up right now, so you can back out just in case you haven't seen the final boss yet. So there's your spoiler warning. Back out if you don't want to be spoiled on the final boss. But for those of you who are staying, please enjoy. All right. That's not worth it. Oh, that's so annoying. That slowed the fight down so much. Where the fuck is it? Did I pop the buff? I don't know. I don't want to destroy that, no. I gotta do it again. My insane pace. That was probably the fastest. We had a couple of like tiny mishaps, but there was also some like really good moments. The build at its core is like really taking advantage of this 10% range attack speed per active minion. You can have up to like 7 minions with this set. 70% range attack is disgusting. You're getting, and then you're using a fast firing weapon like the shuriken. The damage on the shuriken is like relatively low, but when it crits, you're seeing the, that scared me. You're seeing the 25% critical hit damage from it alone. You're seeing 40% critical hit damage from your ranged combat stat. You're getting momentum up to, stacks up to 10 times. You're getting that to 20%, like in a short fucking amount of time. And you're like almost always critting because of how quickly you're throwing your shit out. 10%. So like every 10th shuriken you're throwing is giving you this buff that lasts. Like once the buff starts, it starts to like drain down, right? But like if it procs again, it's just gonna reset and then reset and then reset. And you're throwing them so fast, and you're also contributing to how fast you're gonna throw them by adding minions. So they get faster and faster and faster until you're at like 7 minions. And obviously, like, it's taking me a second to summon right now because I'm not hitting anything, but if we were hitting something, we'd be critting, which contributes to our mana regen. And then you start throwing this fast, and it's like, it's just endless crits. Endless crits. And the minions last a while too, so you don't have to constantly summon, but you do want to keep it up. And then if you don't want to keep it up, if you want to be a little lazy about it, then you would go for 50% lifespan, and they would last even longer. But the reason I didn't go for it is because I'm totally fine with popping them whenever I need to. We have the resources, and these two are really good. I could not go for these, but that would like neglect the minions DPS a little bit, and then go for this and, you know, worry less about summoning them so often. But at this build's prime, the minions actually do like relatively high damage. You got 7 of them all shooting for 82 base damage. That's also getting increased by 50% of your magic damage increase. They also attack quickly. They have a chance to crit. But it's mainly this 50% of your magic damage, and then in the magic tree you have 50% magic damage for a short duration on critical hit. Obviously, that's going through the fucking roof. 10% of your magic barrier is added as magic damage. 75 magic barrier per active minion. That's 7 minions. So that obviously makes that juice the fuck up as well. And then up to 6% magic damage based on your remaining mana. You're always at full mana. And once all your minions are summoned anyway, you don't have to spend any mana because you're not really using it. But again, it's always maxed out because you're always critting. And then your armor also comes with magic damage and max mana and stuff like that. It's pretty nasty, main. And the armor also gives your minions some extra damage too.